Okay, hello everyone. I hope you are well. Thank you all for coming today. My name is Camila Perussi. I work as Financial Institutions Campaign Manager at Synergia Animal, an international animal protection organization working in countries of the Global South to reduce the suffering of farm animals and promote a more compassionate food choices. I'm also part of the Stop Financing Factory Farm campaign, and my main role is campaigning to bring more transparency to the financial sector. Before we start our call in, how can you stop financing factory farming meeting? I want to remind everyone that our meeting today is recorded. We will be sending out this recording to each of you for reference and to those in the time zones that are compatible with our meeting time today. Please turn your camera off and rename yourself if you are not comfortable with being recorded. Otherwise, we are excited to see you all. If you need interpretation, choose the language channel displayed right at the bottom of Zoom under the language icon. We also want to welcome everyone to ask questions or make comments in French, Spanish, Portuguese, as well as English. I will now handle it over to Bianca to lead our knowledge of country. You can go back.
Thank you, Camilla. Hi, everyone. My name's Bianca, calling in today from Maghreb in Morocco, home to the Lakmas, the Ghazwa, the Bani Msara, and the Khoni Amasin peoples, among many others. I acknowledge their custodianship today of the land on which I call you all from and extend that respect to anyone in the room with us also. For the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign, I act as the coalition coordinator, coming from a decade working as an organizer and campaigner alongside Indigenous communities and in land rights claims primarily across Asia Pacific and the Latam regions. And note that as we have a lot of different interpreters today and translators, we'll be speaking as slowly as possible to accommodate and to ensure everybody is able to understand along the way. If for some reason that you can't understand or we're going a little bit quickly, please pop in the chat to guide us. We'll start today with an acknowledgement of country, which is custom in my homeland of Australia. So we begin by acknowledging the Gadigal and Wangal people of our nation, the traditional custodians of Bullanomming, where I come from in Sydney, Australia. It's the land on which I grew, I learnt and became a part of this expansive environmental rights movement. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander or Indigenous peoples joining us today from anywhere in the world. For anyone joining who would like to acknowledge their own custodians, please do so in the chat in any language that you like, and we'll be sharing this within the notes at the end of the webinar.
Thank you, Bianca. Now, Kezia, you can go to the other slide, please. Well, now, first of all, we need to establish some rules of engagement in order to have a good dynamic. So first, ask questions in the chat and we will reply as soon as we can. Please mute yourself when you are not speaking to limit background voice. When we open for questions, wait your turn to speak. 4, we encourage you to keep the camera on. It would be great to see you, but we understand if you cannot for any reason. And last but not least, feel free to ask me, Camila or Bianca, for help by sending me a message in the chat. We have a team of technical, translation, and guiding facilitators ready to help you wherever it is needed. As for our speakers today, we will have Ashley, the Senior International Agriculture and Climate Finance Campaigner, joining from Friends of the Earth US. Lad from Bank Information Center, who joins as their environmental director with a focus on the World Bank Group's programs in climate, forest, landscape, agriculture, and transport. Kelly, who also joins us from Friends of the Earth US and is a senior research and policy analyst in the International Climate and Agriculture Finance Program. Kezia, who's a multifaceted member of the Self-Financing Factory Farm and research lead for the campaign's early warning system. Alessandra, researcher at the International Accountability Project with a lot of expertise in managing the early warning system. And Erika Shananini, Mexico Indigenous Young Leader and Self-Financing Factory Farm Ambassador. And what to expect? Our agenda will cover an overview of the campaign, how we are working to pressure MDBs to divest from industrial animal agriculture, case studies and ongoing initiatives, and reflect on some strategies and steps to advocate for policies and that promote sustainable food production and prioritize the well-being of people, animals, and the planet. A reminder for speakers, please let our facilitators know to skip to the next slide by saying next slide, please, when you want to move on. We will have Bianca gently timekeeping along the way. Thank you.
Thanks, Camilla. Kezia, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign is a global campaign to end development bank funding of industrial animal agriculture. Besides being a growing coalition of over 25 different members from across the world, we're also guided by 6 expert steering committee member organizations, and we work alongside local partners and communities to document and redress the harmful impacts of industrial livestock and feedstock production. So to set the scene for everybody joining, there will be some names that might be familiar to you and some that won't be. And the different S3F is what we call Stop Financing Factory Farming, steering committee members who work to guide our strategies, our tactics, and the core work of the campaign are the 6 logos that you see now on your screen. So together, we're made up of 6 worldwide organizations that represent a mixed collective. Some are focused on policy-driven change, community campaigning, animal and human rights, and ultimately all come together to use different tactics to move financing of factory farming away from being harmful for land and life and towards sustaining it for future generations. The first that you can see somewhere there is Global Forest Coalition. They're a worldwide coalition of 118 Indigenous peoples organizations, women's group and NGOs included, from 70 different countries. And they promote rights-based, gender-just, and socially equitable and effective policies to address the main drivers of forest loss, including industrial livestock farming. Their team is here with us in the background today, guiding our tech and translations. So if anyone who might need some translation help or is not understanding some of the tech, you are more than welcome to ask in the chat, and they will help you there. We also have Bank Information Center, who focuses on reversing policies and programs of multilateral development banks, which some of us might know as MDBs, that exacerbate climate change, that undermine human rights, and that further marginalize people who have historically faced discrimination. They do this primarily by partnering with civil society organizations and civil society in general to develop in developing and transition countries to monitor and influence the policies and operations of the World Bank Group and other international financial institutions as well. Today, we have Lad joining us to speak more about this later. We also have on the steering committee Friends of the Earth US, who have a network of in 74 different countries around the world, and they work at the nexus of environmental protection, economic justice, and social justice to defend in and Kelly, whose roles focus on advancing policies to support a just transition, again, away from factory farming and reducing public institutional purchases of industrial meat and dairy. The next is the International Accountability Project, which is an advocacy organization that pushes for policy change. They also enhance local advocacy efforts and support local activists and communities by opening doors at influential decision-making spaces. Joining us today from the International Accountability Project is Alessandro, who you'll see on your screen, who works alongside Kezia with us in making sure that data informs who we target our efforts towards. We have World Animal Protection, who are an international animal welfare organization, and their mission is to create a better world for animals through transforming our food system and stopping the exploitation of wild animals. They form part of the steering committee with a focus on policy change and resource development for civil society organizations. And lastly, we have Sinergia Animal, who's an international animal protection organization, and they work with countries in the global south to work towards reducing the suffering of farmed animals and promoting more compassionate food choices. My co-host today, Camilla, is joining us from their team and is currently on the road. So hopefully with that overview, you've caught everyone that makes us up alongside the many members that form part of the work that we do, some of whom are in the room today. Thanks, Kezia. Next slide. A small note that as I share my screen, this is a line. If you can change that when possible, Kezia, to the next one. Why we focus on factory farming. So when we look at our most pressing environmental and public health problems, we can draw a line directly back to industrial animal agriculture as a key driver. Across the globe, industrial livestock are wreaking havoc on our environment and on our communities, and we all see this in different ways, depending on the work that we do and where you're all coming from in the world. They're a major cause of greenhouse gas emissions, of biodiversity loss, deforestation, water depletion, and air and water contamination. Honestly, the list goes on. These impacts disproportionately harm women, Indigenous peoples, and low-income communities of color. Furthermore, intensive livestock production causes a lot of animal suffering and increases the risk of antibiotic resistance and new pandemics. So you can see on your screen a bit of an overview, but of course, this list is not everything that is covered. Our campaign research along the way has uncovered a startling reality. Over the past 10 years, the top 5 multilateral development banks, or again, MDBs, depending on who's in the room, have poured over $4.5 billion of donor country money into big meat companies in countries like Brazil, Ecuador, China, Vietnam, and Kenya, all under this guise of development. As one example of a name that you might all be familiar with, the International Finance Corporation, or IFC, is the largest public investor in this sector. And they've sunk more than $2.2 billion into meat and dairy corporations, decade or 10-year period that I mentioned before. So while the banks argue that their investments fuel job creation, help feed the world, a big argument around food security, the truth, obviously, that our campaign has worked towards is knowing that it's far grimmer than this. The loans that we see drive climate change and biodiversity loss. They cause a heightened influence of big corporations and in turn, of course, detrimental impacts. Like I was saying before, everything that impacts food sovereignty, farmers and indigenous peoples, and of course, animal suffering. Kez, you can jump to the next slide, please. So to provide an overview of the impacts, livestock production is a leading source of methane emissions. With business as usual growth scenarios, they project that the livestock sector will account for half of the world's emissions. Sorry, I'm just looking at that slide. Half of the world's emissions budgets for 1.5 degrees by 2030 and 80% by 2050. And as globally, 5 of the top the same like Exxon or BP or Shell. So despite the sector's high emissions and significant environmental impacts, internal lateral development support of industrial livestock production as being aligned with the Paris Agreement and Sustainable Development Goals. We know in our campaign work and in everything that we do that this does not align with the sustainable future that we all envision. So through the work that we do with SVF, we work to expose this contradiction and advocate for a shift in these big investments towards a sustainable food system. Next slide, please, Kevia.
Hi, while I have this opportunity, Bianca, do you want to turn your video off? Because I think several people are struggling with your internet connection. Thanks.
Oh, yes, of course. Sorry. And I can, in the next little bit, fix that. Let me see. I'm hoping that is a little bit better, but if not, please let me know. And Camilla, please feel free to jump in where possible, and you can take over some of these slides if I'm not being heard correctly. And apologies as I couldn't see the chat at the same time. So hopefully this is a little better. I was saying before that investments in factory farming have a negative impact on almost all of the sustainable development goals that we saw in the last slide, and they undermine our ability to meet the Paris Agreement. As a quick stop, while everyone looks at what's on their screen, it might be a good chance to have an overview very quickly of what the Sustainable Development Goals are and the Paris Agreement. Just to note that some people in the room might not be too familiar with them, or that maybe the words might be different in the translations as well. The Sustainable Development Goals, as some of us are aware, are a set of 17 connected global objectives, and they were adopted by the UN member states back in 2015. They look to address different social, economic, and environmental challenges by 2030. Thank you. And the Paris Agreement is an international treaty within the UN framework that we might know as the UNFCCC, sorry, and they aim to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius and essentially really follow the limit of temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. As I started this section, we can understand that industrial animal agriculture really contradicts these goals and agreements by contributing a lot to greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, biodiversity loss, water pollution, and many other health risks. And I just thought to repeat this just in case it got lost along the way with the internet connection. Kezia, if you can please skip through to the next slide and the one after that. Thank you. And one more next. Great. So in light of everything that I have spoken about so far, just to kick us off, the main goal of the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign is to stop public development finance for animal agribusiness and really shift this finance to food systems that use agroecological practices and high animal welfare standards. Different methods that would support smallholder farmers and communities and that are just, equitable and sustainable. In summary, our vision is clear. We aim to secure policies that exclude all industrial livestock projects from development finance institution portfolios. So at its core, S3F focuses on, oh yeah, Kezia, you can keep that slide. That was great. Thank you. At its core, S3F focuses on leading resistance to new agribusiness projects in development bank pipelines. We focus on educating community organizations and banks alike on the connection and the contradictions of why industrial animal agriculture financing is not compatible with the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and the bank's own policies. We work in different ways to engage banks directly to get them to exclude or urge finance factory farming as part of their commitments. And we also use data to monitor new industrial livestock projects. We use this data and monitor projects across 16 development finance institutions through something we call the early warning system, which is a project that both Kezia and Alessandro will discuss more with you later in this webinar. And to wrap up, giving you all an overview of what we do, who is involved, and what we focus on. If you can jump to the next slide, Kezia. A key goal for us is narrative change. So alongside this on-the-ground work and backdoor policy and advocacy work, we come together with organizations like some of the ones that are in the room today to build this dominant narrative that we don't need factory farms to feed the world. And as a matter of fact, industrial livestock is not a solution to food insecurity. And we know in all the different types of work that we do that narrative change at a global level can support and enhance many more localized social movement calls for food system transformation. Great, thank you, Kezia. You'll now have a chance to tell us more about why you're here via a poll. And the way to do this is you will see a link posted in the chat in a minute. Please click on this link and briefly take a moment to tell us why you as an individual, or if you're a representative of an organization, have chosen to join us today. And I'll hand over to Kezia to talk through these polls and what we're seeing. And you'll see now some more information on your screen.
Thanks, everybody. And you should see on the screen now that there's an option to go to the website, slido.com, and type in the code that's on the screen, and you can vote in the poll that we have here. And we've got a few polls just to open things up and get a bit more interactive and understand a bit about where everybody is coming from. I'm hoping that this is working. I'm gonna make sure I voted on it for myself. Oh, something strange just happened. My screen has gone blank. Sorry about this. I don't know what's going on here. All right. I've got a technical issue. I don't know if somebody can jump in to change who is sharing their screen or deal with that, because right now I can't see anything on my screen. Ismail or Bianca, apologies. I don't know what's gone wrong.
No problem. This is part of the working alongside tech. I will share my screen in just one moment. And while I do so, if everybody else can jump on that link and share what's possible, I'll be sharing the slides for the moment. Thank you all for your patience. Great.
Okay. I think my screen has come back, so I can try again in a second. Let me just double check what's going on.
All good.
Okay, if people can hear me, I am seeing some results coming in now. I'm a little bit afraid of sharing my screen again, but I will try in a second. Bear with me one sec. But at the moment, it's really looking like most people, 50% of the people who are on the call are coming from Latin America and the Caribbean. So it's fantastic to have so many of you here today from there. Also seeing and loads of people from other places as well. Sorry, I'm still having some technical challenges to share my screen again. Bianca, you can do that. In interest of time,
I think we can, yeah.
You're probably about to say the same thing as me. And thank you everybody for your patience. Perhaps I want to hand over to Ashley at this point, and we can come back to the poll after this section when I've solved my technical problems.
Thank you, Kezia. No worries at all. I can see the slide on my end anyway. Hello, everyone. It's so great to be here with you all. Thanks for joining us today. As Bianca already said, I'm Ashley Schaefer-Yildiz. I'm a senior campaigner with Friends of the Earth US, and I've been part of the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign for several years now. So I'm going to speak a little bit today about some of the campaigns, some of the multilateral development bank projects that we've resisted. Sorry, I will speak more slowly. And some of our successes. So just to kick it off, I know Kezia and Alessandro are going to speak about the early warning system a bit later. But I just wanted to mention that we monitor new industrial livestock projects at 16 development finance institutions through the early warning system, which is a project of International Accountability Project. And using the early warning system, we are able to flag any proposed MDB loans to industrial livestock projects. When there's a high-risk project that meets our criteria for what we call an iconic fight or kind of a mass mobilization moment, we trigger a rapid response movement to try to stop these worst of the worst projects from getting approved. So as you can see, if you can go to the next slide, please, Kezia. As you can see on this word cloud, I don't know if you're able to change the slide. This is an example. This is from our latest World Bank Spring Campaign mobilization. And as you can see here, iconic fights are a very strategic way to develop the narrative that we do not need factory farms to feed the world. They're also a very effective way to make our case, build our case against factory farming for the multilateral development banks and the executive directors, and then do movement building across the globe. In some instances, we actually have been able to stop projects, as in the case of Marfrig. If you could please go to the next slide. Thank you. We were successful in stopping a proposed $200 million loan to a Brazilian beef giant called Marfrig in 2022 through some really effective movement building and bank advocacy work. So a quick summary of that campaign. I know some of the organizations on today were probably a part of that campaign. If you were, thank you so much for your support. So in April of 2021, we found out that the Inter-American Development Bank's private sector arm, IDB Invest, was proposing a $200 million loan to Marfrig Global Foods, which is the second largest beef company in the world. And it has a very long track record of failed commitments, corrupt practices, land grabbing, and illegal deforestation in Brazil. The goal of this loan was to support the company's Plano Verde, which claimed it would achieve deforestation-free livestock production by 2025 in the Amazon. In reality, this loan really would have helped greenwash Marfrig and given it a green seal of approval for private sector financial flows. And this is the case with a lot of these multilateral development bank projects. Once they're approved, the private sector then puts a lot more financial flows towards the project. So in 2021, in September, we launched a global campaign to stop this project. And we compiled all of the evidence we could, documenting the potential impacts on the environment, on human rights, the various corruption concerns we had, and we made the case that a massive corporation like Marfrig should not be relying on public investment funds to implement its own sustainability plans. So fast forward after 6 months of campaigning, including gathering 285 signatures from civil society organizations, a briefing to the US government, and mobilizing over 24 organizations to write letters of concern to their executive directors. IDB Invest dropped the loan due to environmental concerns. So that was a really great moment for the campaign. Next slide, please. I also wanted to highlight another project in 2022. On the heels of our Marfrig victory, we campaigned against a $200 million proposed IFC loan to Louis Dreyfus Corporation, or LDC, to support the trade giant's commodity feed crop expansion in the Cerrado, which is a threatened biodiversity hotspot in Brazil. As is the case with a lot of these projects, we only had 6 weeks to campaign before the board vote, once the project was disclosed. But we were able to mobilize major global opposition. In the end, we were only able to get 2 governments to abstain, the Nordic Baltics and the Dutch executive directors. But on the positive side, we succeeded in delaying the vote twice, driving a full board discussion of the loan. And that resulted in the executive directors asking the IFC to present their full agribusiness portfolio to the board. And this created an amazing opportunity for more advocacy on their ag portfolio. And then I just wanted to mention, once this loan was approved in July 2022, we moved into project monitoring with one of our partners on the ground in Brazil, Rede Social da Justiça y Direitos Humanos, or the social network. And we've been working with them. They did 2 field visits, and with the support of one of their partner organizations, CPT, they documented the environmental and human rights impacts of LDC's soy supply chain in the southern region of Brazil, near one of LDC's largest soy crushing facilities. They are going to be releasing these findings in Portuguese only, but they're going to be releasing this report next month. So stay tuned, folks in Brazil who want to receive that. And then the last example, next slide, please. I wanted to share that really illuminates and kind of highlights our work is the Pernaka campaign. And so this is an ongoing campaign. There's been many, many years of resistance. Friends of the Earth, US and Bank Information Center, we provide strategic and technical support on behalf of the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign to an Ecuadorian organization called SEDENMA. And the SEDENMA coordinates our campaign on the ground in Ecuador targeting Pernaka. Pernaka is Ecuador's largest meat company with over 115 factory farms across the country. And after 2 years of documenting the socio-environmental impacts of Pernaka's factory farms, in June of last year, of 2023, we launched a new campaign, a digital and a communications campaign under the hashtag Pernaka Contamina. And we released a case study, a report, and this 2-minute campaign video on Pernaka's impacts on the indigenous Sachilas communities. I would like if we could just briefly watch this short video, please.
Now might be a good time for me to switch back to sharing my screen, as I'm not sure that Bianca is ready to share screen with the sound. But Ashley, I think I'll give you the option. We are running up to the time of your allocated speaker slot. Would you like to play the video or would you like to move ahead with talking more about Pernaka? I think there's another slide about Pernaka after this.
We can skip the video. That's fine. I think maybe we can just send the link out to the video or put the link in the chat. It's just a great 2-minute video about the campaign. So yeah, that's fine if we can share that. Yeah, so the last bit of information I wanted to share on the Pernaka campaign is that SEDENMA has organized a couple of press conferences over the last couple of years. They've garnered over 30 media hits on this campaign. It's been very successful. And in July of last year, our steering committee of the campaign, we traveled to Santo Domingo to meet with these impacted indigenous communities. And alongside the Sachilas governor, we filed a formal complaint to the IDB Invest's accountability mechanism called the MISI. And it's an ongoing, it's in the compliance phase, which will involve an investigation and a report. And we're also going to be moving forward with a complaint to the IFC's accountability mechanism called the CAO, the COW. So the last slide, or the next slide, please, which is the last campaign I'm going to mention, is just our World Bank Spring campaign mobilizations. Apologies, there's a lot of text on that slide, but a quick overview is that we spearheaded a citizen petition in collaboration with We Move Europe and an open letter calling on the World Bank to halt its investments in industrial livestock production. Thank you for the time warning. I will wrap up. And we delivered our demands at the World Bank headquarters last month in Washington, D.C. on behalf of 160,000 citizens from 131 countries across the globe, and on behalf of 280 civil society organizations from 60 countries. And we ran a big digital campaign generating over 1,000 tweets using our hashtag in 7 different languages. And we received 4.5 million impressions, and we reached over 2.5 million people. So there was a lot of media generated around this. And I think this is just an example of us leveraging key moments to build our global movement. I'm going to just skip the next slide because we don't have time, but I just wanted to say that in addition to these iconic fights, we continually send letters of concern around projects that we find concerning to the banks to register our opposition. And as we continue to track multilateral development bank financing of industrial livestock production, we would love to work with you all in your regions. If there are projects that arise that you would like to resist, we would love to support you and or have you join our global campaigns. So I'll hand it over to Shananine, but thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you. And we'll make sure that we share these slides afterwards so that everybody can see all the amazing detail that Ashley has put in here of our work so far.
Muchas gracias, sí, gracias Ashley, y también para seguir con todo esto que nos puso en contexto Ashley acerca de las movilizaciones del Banco Mundial o en contra del Banco Mundial y sus financiamientos a la ganadería industrial, queríamos compartirles también este video que salió en esa campaña y si pudieras ponerle play.
Hi, I'm Shanandine. I'm from Mexico. I'm from the Iguá community, and this is a territory that is heavily affected by factory farming expansion. And we're here outside the World Bank, where we have gathered with a bunch of organizations for an action day to call for the World Bank to stop financing extractive industries like factory farming. We have gathered 160,000 signatures from across 80 countries in a coalition alongside World Animal Protection, Friends of the Earth, International Accountability Project, and Action Aid to call for the World Bank to stop using public funds for factory farming, because it is an industry that not only harms animals, ecosystems, but also displaces indigenous traditional forms of living, as well as changes the use of the land and the relation to land. That is why we are calling for you to join us to call for the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, to stop financing factory farming.
Muchas gracias, Kesia, si puedes pasar. Ajá. Ahora queríamos como hablar un poco acerca de, después de mostrar cómo el trabajo de investigación y todo el trabajo que hacen los demás compañeros de la coalición ha hecho que se puedan hacer cambios. Algo muy importante en estos procesos es la movilización en territorio y la creación de redes de movimiento. Y ya que hemos podido estar, como yo ahora, representando a la campaña como embajadora de las juventudes, intentando involucrar al movimiento climático juvenil, pero también organizaciones de pueblos indígenas lideradas por juventudes, hemos tenido la oportunidad de hablar sobre la campaña y de crear aliados en estos diferentes contextos. Uno fue en la Semana del Clima de Nueva York, donde junto a Viernes por el Futuro Nueva York y otras organizaciones pudimos ser parte de la marcha para acabar con los combustibles fósiles, que congregó a casi 75,000 personas el año pasado para que se hablara como sobre acabar con los combustibles fósiles. Pero dentro del movimiento climático consideramos que algo muy importante es también hablar sobre la ganadería, ¿no? Y cómo también la ganadería es parte de esta misma economía fósil en su versión industrial. Y es por eso que algo muy histórico esta vez fue que logramos coordinar a diferentes organizaciones de sistemas alimentarios para crear un contingente sobre acabar con la ganadería, ¿no? Entonces fue como una gran movilización, una gran oportunidad para crear aliados y también otra parte de lo que hemos hecho es cambiar la narrativa, como había dicho Bianca, pero también en eventos internacionales de las Naciones Unidas, pero también de otras organizaciones internacionales. Y durante la Asamblea General, que fue el año pasado, también en Nueva York, pudimos ahí coordinar con otras ONGs también lideradas por personas indígenas, para hablar sobre los sistemas alimentarios, ¿no? E intentar coordinar una narrativa acerca de que, pues sí, no es necesario la ganadería industrial, ni los monocultivos, ni ninguna forma de agronegocio para sostener a las comunidades y que más bien lo que hacen es desplazar estos sistemas tradicionales que han sostenido a las comunidades por generaciones. Entonces, sí, hemos como logrado involucrarnos en el movimiento climático para hablar como de que las cosas van a cambiar, pero podemos ir construyendo colectivamente hacia dónde. Entonces, si puedes pasar a la siguiente. Sí. Y sí, en general también, hace poco también pudimos ser parte de la movilización sobre la huelga global por el clima, que también es convocada por diferentes organizaciones del mundo de juventudes. Y fue muy curioso porque fue el mismo día que el día de la movilización contra el Banco Mundial. Y fue como muy interesante debido a que pudimos coordinar a diferentes aliados de pueblos, diferentes organizaciones que han resonado con, es- con este llamado, y fue como muy, muy poderoso poder ver que esta campaña también se puede ir apropiando, ¿no? Como decía Ashley, por cada colectivo, cada comunidad que vea que el agronegocio es algo que les atraviesa, ¿no? Si puedes pasar a la última para ir acabando. Ujú. Y sí, en general, lo que hemos intentado hacer dentro del movimiento climático, dentro de organizaciones que trabajan solo combustibles fósiles o solo con financiamiento, es intentar interceptar estas narrativas, ¿no? Así como hemos hecho que organizaciones de sistemas alimentarios hablen con organizaciones que están acabando con los combustibles fósiles, que hablen con juventudes, que hablen con pueblos indígenas trabajando en el territorio, es que lo que intentamos es movilizar, ¿no? Hermanar las luchas para que podamos entonces ir acabando, ¿no? Con todas las industrias extractivas de las que la ganadería industrial es parte, ¿no? Y que entonces se pueda ir creando un movimiento que sea apropiado por todos nosotros, ¿no? En Nairobi, cuando fue la uh, Asamblea de Medio Ambiente sobre las Naciones Unidas, también se logró esto, ¿no? Que pudiéramos hablar para que cuando se negociara la degradación de la tierra, se hablara sobre el impacto que tiene la ganadería industrial. Y en los próximos días y los próximos meses también estamos esperando involucrar a más organizaciones de juventudes, ¿no? Estamos creando ahora, planeando talleres en México, en la conferencia local sobre el clima, pero también en la conferencia regional. Y pues sí, es como una invitación también a todos los que nos escuchan a que puedan involucrarse con nosotros, que puedan seguir, que sigamos en contacto para que entonces podamos construir todo eso en conjunto. Y muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Shananine. And now I will pass it on to Lad from the Bank Information Center and Kelly from Friends of the Earth US to speak more about policy and advocacy within the campaign and MDB engagement. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bianca. You can hear me okay? Yes. Yeah, I'm Lad Cannell. I'm Environment Director at the Bank Information Center. And to be very clear, we're not part of any bank. We're not funded by any bank. We do research and advocacy on multilateral development banks. But we do try to get inside the banks from time to time. And that's part of what I wanted to address. You hopefully have been inspired by the work that Shananine and Ashley have described on the outside of the banks. But we also have sort of what we call an inside strategy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the problems, the solutions, and how we try to get them accepted. Part of that is appealing to some of these values that I've put on this slide here of transparency, accountability, inclusion, and sustainability. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Lad, and please also speak very slowly.
Okay, I will slow down. So this is just to put some numbers in front of you. I think one of the things to keep in mind is that most of the people who work in these banks are economists or finance folks. And so it's very good to be able to come to them with numbers about what we're talking about. And so we did a survey of what the International Finance Corp, the private sector arm of the World Bank, has financed over the last 7 years in livestock. And what we found was a total of $3.5 billion of financing for livestock feed, and livestock products. Now we broke this down into what we could clearly identify as industrial livestock versus what was ambiguous. And while the industrial livestock that we were able to confirm was less than half of the total livestock, the fact that there is not enough information to clearly define what these loans are is in itself a telling example of a lack of transparency. So in any event, I guess we'll go to the next slide. So this is to show really where the bank thinks it is. On the left, you see a picture of their guide for investing in sustainable livestock. And what they have said is, to address some of the issues with sustainable livestock. And these are minor steps that the bank has taken. But what we have found is that the bank's portfolio continues to be misaligned, and it's misaligned on several levels. First of all, there is a failure to recognize risk, that the multilateral banks have consistently miscategorized industrial livestock projects as being of low or moderate risk, whereas we know that these projects all have climate impacts, they all have biodiversity impacts, and health impacts for communities. The second thing is that they fail to address the risks that are there. For example, one of the areas that they normally should be looking at is impacts on biodiversity and natural resource management. And yet, in about half of the projects that we looked at that were industrial livestock projects, this performance standard was not triggered. So they were not even looking at what are the harms to biodiversity and natural resource management. And so what is the change that we want? Let's go to the next slide. What we're talking about is that the bank should actually apply its own performance standards. And here we see, a mitigation hierarchy that starts with avoidance. And the problem is they're not only not avoiding it, they are, as I discussed earlier, they're doubling and tripling the amount of livestock finance that they're providing. So they're not avoiding, they're not minimizing, and only in some cases are they doing any kind of rehabilitation. So those are just an example of what should be done but is not getting done. Next slide, please. So what are the things that we do to help us get the change that we want? Well, we work at a couple of different levels, and one of them is project research. And here you have a photo of some of the folks we work with in Guatemala, meeting with the local community there to talk about the impacts of CMI Alimentos, which is a company headquartered in Guatemala that is impacting the local community, the Xinkas, in their territory there. And we also do research at the policy level, looking at the policies that the bank has proposed. And actually, we find that some of the things that the bank has done in terms of its research are positive and that we can work with those. So they are doing country climate and development reports, which lay out how each country can improve in terms of combining climate and development goals. And they also have just recently published a book called Recipe for a Livable Planet that has some positive elements to it. And so let's go ahead to the next slide. So the three things I just would like to kind of conclude with this, that we focus first on research. And for this, if it's at the project level, we seek community input. And the outcome of that will be a letter, or if it's portfolio-wide research, we'll issue a report. And then we go to meet with staff at IFC or IDB Invest or whichever bank it is. And sometimes this will lead to a corrective action plan or some changes in the actual loan. And then when we're working on higher level policies, we will seek a meeting with executive directors or their advisors to work on policy change. And I think, an important aspect here is to understand that there are different opportunities for us with respect to policies. And one of these, for example, is the safeguards reviews that these banks undertake roughly every 5 years. There's one going on right now for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The Asian Development Bank is also reviewing its policies. So there is an opportunity to provide direct input to policies. And the other thing that we have been seeking is an exclusion policy so that financing for livestock would be excluded from eligibility for financing from the MDBs. So I think that covers most of what I wanted to say. And I guess I'll pass it on to Kezia and Alessandro. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Lad, just before we pass on to Kezia and Alessandro, we have Kelly in the room somewhere here today. If you want to jump off mute, Kelly, you are more than welcome to begin. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate you having me here today. My time is very short, unfortunately. I need to take my pup to the bed, but I wanted to say that thank you, Lad, for that very comprehensive and helpful overview of what we do on the inside. I know that that side of the work is can be less glamorous. It doesn't lend itself to videos, but I do think that it's important for the inside work to complement the outside work. So when we're on the inside, we're always referring to the good research that we've done on the projects that Ashley described, and as Lad also mentioned, whether it's Panaca or CMI Elementos, and we refer directly to field research. Sorry, let me slow down. Field research on impacted communities, and make sure that we bring these very real harms to the fore, both for bank staff who may not be aware of these things, and also to the government shareholders who vote on these projects and who need to understand the impacts that these projects are having. Again, I find, and I think Lad will concur, that we often find ourselves doing a lot of educating. And so I'm glad that we have the opportunity to have those conversations and raise issues in a different format. So thank you all again for attending today. Enjoy the rest of the webinar, and thanks for having me, Bianca and Kezia.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for joining, and hope all goes well with your puppy as well. Appreciate both you and Lad sharing with us today and giving us more of an insight. Now I'll hand over to Alessandro and Kezia to lead in the next section, talking more about the early warning system and how data drives where we put our energies.
Thank you very much, Bianca, and thank you to all the speakers before. It's a pleasure to hear about the success of the campaign, successes of the campaign, and how we're moving forward. I feel we are going in the right direction. So I will present about the early warning system. That is, Kezia, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the early warning system, as Ashley and Bianca mentioned earlier, it's a database that collects the development projects proposed or financed by 16 international financial institutions. It's mostly multilateral development banks, although we also track the US Development and Finance Corporation and the Dutch Development Finance Corporation, the FMO. The early warning system scrapes development projects as soon as they are disclosed by the banks. That happens on a daily basis. So as soon as a project is disclosed, it's there on the early warning system. The ultimate aim of the early warning system is to provide local communities with timely information about development projects that may affect them, and to involve them in development processes that affect them, and ensure that they are consulted, ensure that they have access to reviewed, reliable information, and And that's what International Accountability Project, the organization I work for, aims to promote. That is a model of development that starts from local communities and from local contexts. It's based on local context and participated by projects rights holders. It's a way to also empower these rights holders to uphold and affirm the rights in front of these institutions that way too often fail to address and remedy the adverse impacts they generate with their investments. And this is part of the early warning system work. It also supports civil society organizations and NGOs in their advocacy efforts in front of multilateral development banks. It does so by providing access to data and trends in development finance. And as you can see in the slide, since 2016, the early warning system tracked more than 35,000 projects, which involve 6,000 and more actors, private actors, and that equals an amount of that is 3.1 trillions. And this is just numbers, but the impact on the ground is still there, and that's why we want to reach out to communities and give them a voice. And that's, can you move to the next slide, Kezia? Thank you. That's also the role that the early warning system covers within the SFFF campaign. It tries to be an action trigger among members and partners. That is by sharing, it does so by sharing weekly updates about development projects that the early warning system scrapes. And these projects are reviewed and analyzed before sharing in order to provide information that is complete as much as possible, as much as the information provided by the banks allow. And there is a kind of initial assessment provided about these projects, so as allow coalition members, those who receive the newsletter, to understand in a better way how the projects may potentially impact or support industrial animal agriculture. This, as Vlad said, is not always easy because of the lack of transparency that multilateral development banks keep having, but well, we try our best. There are other ways that the early warning system supports SFFF, and that is by providing, can you move to the next slide, Kezia? Thank you. Yeah, it provides an analysis of trends. Well, we are working on that still, but we aim to provide to collect all the projects that have been financed by multilateral development banks during the past 2.5 years, and see where the money is going in the industrial animal agriculture value chain. So we are trying to divide these projects on the basis of whether they finance primary inputs, that is feed, vaccines, or secondary inputs, fertilizers and seeds. All these inputs in a way contribute to the development of factory farming, or may contribute to it. So yeah, with this study, with this analysis, we want to try to inform advocacy actions of the campaign and members, and provide a tool in general for civil society and partner organizations to use and in the way they see more efficient. And we also want to try and identify the countries, the regions where multilateral development banks mostly invest in industrial animal agriculture systems, and to understand, yeah, where the money is going in general. These hopefully will help not only SFFF, but society in general to understand better the impacts of these investments on the ground. This research is ongoing, as I said, but I can pass it on to Kezia to present a few of the initial data that we got. Thank you.
Alessandro, and I'll hand back over to you in a second. As Alessandro just said, this trends analysis, this aggregate analysis of the historical data from the development bank's disclosures, which means anything we see coming in the pipeline of 16 different development banks. We're analyzing this historical data. It's still a work in progress, but what you can see on this slide is some provisional information for you about one of the most important things I think we need to understand in order to effectively campaign and engage the development banks, which is which banks are actually funding the most animal agriculture projects. It's very complementary to the data that Lad was sharing earlier, which was very focused on the IFC itself. This looks across a broader span, and we can see which development banks are the biggest funders. So at the top, you can see 36 projects funded by the World Bank Group, which actually includes the IFC, which itself has funded the most projects individually. We have 19 projects at the moment that we think it funded in 2023. After that, the Inter-American Development Bank, both its public sector funding to governments and its private sector arm that funds private sector companies, is the biggest funder of animal agriculture. And then you can see other development banks are not as big in this space. Just to clarify, what we mean at the moment with this data is that this is direct investments into what we have categorized as direct production of animal species, the primary inputs that includes animal feed, animal health products, and also processing and slaughter of the animals. When we share this data, hopefully in the next month, which Alessandro has mentioned, we will be sharing much more information and many other aspects, including which countries are seeing the most investment of these projects from the development banks, and also other aspects like which animal species are being funded the most by the banks too. But for now, that's it. I'll hand back over to Alessandro to say a little bit more about our work.
Thank you, Kezia. And yeah, as I was saying, the early warning system tries to be an action trigger, and sometimes we find these iconic fights that Ashley presented before. Sometimes it's just other projects that support the industrial animal agriculture system. And as we saw during this time monitoring development finance institutions, the support can vary a lot. And as you can see in the slide, we've noticed large infrastructure projects explicitly and finance to develop industrial animal agriculture systems such as this in Brazil. That is a big port being constructed just to export grains from the country. And for instance, it's not in the slide, but there was another project in Iraq where a big port was being built just to import grains from Brazil. So these are examples of large infrastructure projects that support these systems. Another way that we noticed, and it's unfortunately a way that is very untransparent, is financing factory farming through financial intermediaries. For instance, last year we noticed a loan from the IFC to Banco Santander, one of the major Spanish commercial banks. And recently we also noticed a guarantee from MIGA, the multilateral investment guarantee agency, if I'm not wrong, guaranteeing Santander's investments in Brazil. Santander's lending to its Brazilian corporate clients. And in the past, not so far away past, Santander has been linked to deforestation in Brazil and other environmental issues. So we see these as problematic loans and support in general, but it's harder to assess due to the lack of transparency. Another way is that in which MDBs support the development of industrial agriculture is by supporting the implementation of policies for project preparation. As you can see in the slide, recently we noticed a loan from the Asian Development Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank to Bangladesh to support the implementation of its national determined contribution, which includes provisions that support the development of industrial agriculture. And it's supposed to be a document that prevents climate change from happening or from accelerating. So it's in clear contrast to the aim of the document and the commitments of these banks. In other cases, and this is happening worldwide. In the other examples in the slide, you see policy support from the IFC, which supported the government of Malawi to implement policies that would lead to an increase in the export of maize. Malawi is a country where food insecurity is ongoing, and the fact that the IFC supports such policies is worrying. I think that's it. And our study, just to conclude, will also help to understand, as you can understand from the slide, there are many actors involved, not only multilateral development banks. Governments play a role as well in this development of factory farming. Private companies do, and hopefully we can highlight the role that these actors play in the system as well, in order to support civil society and communities in upholding the rights in front of these institutions and other actors. And that's it from me. I will pass it on to Kezia again for the last slide. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. And what I think we've highlighted is it's very complicated. There is a lot of funding from the development banks to industrial animal agriculture through quite diverse methods, including direct funding of the projects, like companies themselves, funding governments, shaping policy and trade, and funding the financial intermediaries. So it can be quite confusing. If you would like to understand more, or if you would like to contribute to this work in any way, or just understand more about it, any of the things that we've raised today, I know that there's a lot of terms, there can be a lot of jargon. We haven't had that much time to really dive into all the detail today. On the screen, you can see a number of ways where you can take action and get involved, at least in the work that Alessandro and I have presented. And I know that Lad, Ashley, others have been sharing other ideas from their areas of work beforehand. Specifically for us, you can get in touch with us. We encourage you to use the early warning system and also to subscribe to the specific newsletter that we're sharing with the early warning system data that we've analyzed about animal agriculture projects. You can, of course, use that information to act in any way that you want on the projects and development banks pipelines if you want to work with local organizations, communities, any kind of coalition to raise concerns or oppose projects. In a more internal way, you can provide feedback to help us improve our work. You can share knowledge from your context. In particular, that really helps us because industrial animal agriculture can look very different in different contexts. The political, the social, environmental, all of these contexts can be so different that the more we understand of different areas, different places, we can better identify which projects are really impactful in supporting animal agriculture. We also need to do a lot of work to define what we do want the development banks to fund. So if you have any ideas about that, we would love to work with you and hear from you. And finally, as Alessandra and I have mentioned, we are going to be publishing a white paper or a brief summary of the data that we've analysed for at least 2022 and 2023 to show which development banks, which countries, which kinds of animal agriculture, what parts of the value chain, is it the private sector, is it governments, some key facts about how the development banks are financing animal agriculture globally, which can hopefully inform everybody's advocacy and campaigning. So thank you very much. Thanks again to Alessandra and everybody else. And that concludes, I think, all of the presentations. I think we've got a bit of time for breakout rooms. Bianca, back over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kezia and Alessandro, for guiding us through this. As always, some of the questions in the chat could be talked about for a while, and I know some of our other speakers have some additional points. So as we come towards the final part of today's webinar, where there's been a lot of information to take in, let's take a moment now to reflect together on the critical intersections that we focused on today. So we started with the misalignment of industrial animal agriculture with the SDGs, those frameworks for addressing global environmental challenges, and of course the Paris Agreement that outlined to us these ambitious targets to combat climate change internationally. We heard about how our campaign collective comes together using data, policy, and community-led campaigning to combat industrial animal agriculture, as this financing directly contradicts bigger international goals and agreements for environmental justice and a sustainable future. And we've heard about different cases of success, starting with Ashley and Shananine, as well as different cases of concern that help to amplify as well as guide our collaborations across the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign. So now we'll move into breakout rooms to discuss a key question. What do you think is an attractive or impactful area for engaging the development banks? Participants will be separated based on language needs. This is hoping to facilitate some inclusive discussions where everyone can participate. For anyone joining us who needs interpreting, you'll be staying within the main room to discuss together with the support of our translators in Spanish, Portuguese, and French. And for those who may not directly be involved with development banks, feel free to draw from your expertise, your areas of focus, or your location to contribute to this discussion. Just as Kezia was saying, even something such as your context and your region is really useful to be able to guide everything that we do together. Each breakout room will have about 5 to 7 minutes to discuss, and then we'll reconvene in the main room to share insights and ideas with a larger group together if we have time at the end. We know that these conversations can go for a lot longer than 5 to 7 minutes, and so we encourage everyone to begin with an introduction of who you are, where you're calling from, and then continue beginning your reflections together. There's always ways to connect after this webinar. This is just the beginning of the work that we might do together. So please be encouraged to spark that connection first. If those who are part of the SDF campaign are within those breakout rooms, please pop your hand up and just let the group know in the chat who you are, just in case there are any immediate questions that can be sent your way. Thank you so much, Kezia. I'll leave it to you and Ishmael to divide everyone into the groups.
Thank you so much. And yeah, as we go into the breakout rooms, of course, feel free to use the space. That's the guiding question. If you do want to just have a bit more of a free chat, if you want to use that time with some of the presenters you might be with to ask some questions or share thoughts, that would also be, I'm sure, a wonderful use of time. Thanks. And hopefully you'll be getting an invite to a breakout room momentarily.
Hola a todos. Hello?
Hi.
Hi, I wasn't sure if you could listen to me.
Hi, hola.
Hola. Bueno, yo soy Andrea Echeverry de la Coalición Mundial por los Bosques. Estoy desde Colombia y hago parte de la campaña Alto al Financiamiento a la Ganadería Industrial. También por si tienen alguna inquietud.
Sí, hola, todos también. Bueno, yo también ya me presenté hace rato, pero igual, yo estoy ahorita en Puebla, soy de México, entonces también. Yo me dedico en la campaña más a el involucramiento de juventudes.
Y yo creo que la pregunta era que cómo creemos que podemos cambiar, digamos, involucrar a los bancos de desarrollo. No sé si alguien tenga alguna opinión, algo para expresar en estos cortos minutos que nos quedan, u opiniones generales. Sí, adelante.
Um, Hello, I'm Dila from Indonesia. So, actually, this is the new information for me. I just know about the financing farming, and I'm interested about the topic that Senanin and Lat informed before. I just want to ask that um, as the youth and as I also the social worker in Indonesia, as I know that to make the policy change to the government is not easy and it is so challenging. And how about when we do research and when we do like I think in Indonesia we cannot do campaign that easily. It is like maybe only online campaign, but it is not for the like physical campaigns. And what I want to know, do you have any suggestions about how we can advocate this kind of policy change to our government when I think that this kind of issue is not familiar enough in my country, but I think it is impacting our pollution and also climate change. Do you have any suggestion for that? How we can advocating with the government or yeah with the higher level of the stakeholder? Thank you.
Sí, ¿puedo contestar yo? Like in English? Or well, yeah, I think that what you raise is like very important because that is like a challenge that at least I think we have faced as well to like communicate all this data, all this like research that the team has done to like the government to like actually see actual change in like the places we live. But yeah, what I believe is that it's part of the things that we can do together. Like I believe that if we, I like in Indonesia, I don't know if we have specific data about the financing in there or like the factory farms that are like affecting the region where you live. But I think it would be important then like to connect and collaborate to see how we can make this bridge and maybe you as well with the networks and organizations, you know, bring all this information to the decision makers. And yeah, maybe try to uplift that in the big negotiations that happen where your governments might be in there as well. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking right now, but maybe Andrea also has an idea.
Well, I think that for influencing or for engaging with banks, governments, Sorry, I'm listening to Megan's interpretation, so hold on, I will turn it on, turn it off. La maravillosa interpretación de Megan. Well, anyway, I think that there are a lot of ways of transforming the investments of the banks. And that means, as you could see, that we have different strategies. So we're not only engagement directly with banks, but we're also targeting other decision makers and national governments, because we do understand that this whole structure that allows the expansion of factory farming and other ways of unsustainable livestock rely on different levels, on the local, on the national, and the international one. So that's why we try to somehow mix things up a little bit and engage in, I don't know, for instance, in some demonstrations, but also directly talking to the executive directors through open letters, etc. I mean, it's not like also this movement is as huge, for instance, as the ones against fossil fuels, which is absolutely important. But we do have in-person demonstrations also during the climate negotiations, also during other events such as the World Bank spring meetings or the Financing Common Summit or other events that gather mostly like grassroots movements like FOSPA, which will be happening in Bolivia next month, or we're thinking about some actions during CDB, also targeting, for instance, the Colombian government, where I'm based, where I'm from, who will be hosting the Biodiversity Cup, and understanding that, well, the expansion of factory farming and the whole system, as Kessie explained, like feed crops and everything, is one of the major drivers, not only of climate change, but also of biodiversity loss. So as Sananin said, it will be great to connect and to understand how this is happening in different regions, because, well, it's not the same Colombia, Mexico, the US, or Indonesia. So we could think about different targets and learn about the strategies that we have used to help strengthen the voices against factory farming and public finance or factory farming, because it's something urgent. It's directly, as you mentioned, Fadila, related to climate change, but it looks like it's not one of the greatest concerns in climate justice movement.
Thanks, Andrea and Sunny. Just want to add some questions. From your explanations and your experience, how long it takes for you and your organization to to make the awareness to the community or the stakeholder? How long it takes since the first time you bring this issue to the community, so they can
Hi
aware
all.
about it?
Apologies to interrupt what I'm sure is a very amazing discussion and a little abrupt reconvening in the bigger breakout room. I just thought I would just quickly ask, I can't remember who was speaking, Fadila, if you want to ask your question in the chat to the person that you were asking. We only have a couple of minutes to wrap up today, but some of the questions that were asked, at least in my breakout room, were the beginning of very long conversations that I'm sure we're going to have. This is just the very, very first. Thank you, and apologies for cutting you off. So we have just 3 or 4 minutes left. I might open the floor for anyone who is in a breakout room. If you would just like to have one key takeaway, I'll sort of randomly just pick 2 or 3 people just to share with the group any reflection or interesting introductions that were made.
I can go first very quickly with a rushed summary of some really interesting and important points raised by people in our group. There was one interesting comment about joining the dots between what the development banks are funding and also the private financial actors who are also involved in the bigger picture of the financial ecosystem, from the example of Santander, of course, and many of the private companies who also have private investment, could we connect with the existing activities of sort of shareholder advocacy to kind of improve our impact when we identify relevant projects? And there was also this question from a couple of people in the room about joining the dots between the individual cases and the policy in general, a question of how successfully the banks are doing that, because it seems like there are so many individual cases where we're demonstrating the issues. How is that? How are we doing with building the bigger narrative of the fact that the policies need to change? And attention was drawn to this idea of the risk categorization of projects, where we need to make sure we're building the argument that they need to be considered more risky overall. Thanks. I'll in the notes make sure that I do a better justice to those points, and we can follow up with them for any next conversations. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kezia. Any final comment before we wrap up for today? Lad, do you want to jump off mute?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Bianca. And yeah, thank everybody for coming. One of the things is we are still trying to define what are the alternatives to factory farming. We talk about agroecology. That is one of the things we want to promote. And we want to find ways that can be supported in the client countries of the banks. The banks have tools for this, things like technical assistance, technical cooperation. They have insurance products that they could be delivering, but we're always interested in hearing more from folks about solutions that they've seen taking place in their countries. So if people have thoughts on that, we'd love to hear them. And one final thing I'll say is just that it takes patience and persistence to achieve this change. So, this is the beginning, not the end of our journey here. But we welcome as many allies as we can get. So thank you all for joining. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Lad. So as Lad said, let's continue working together and think of this as just the first of many conversations and a spark to what might be some interesting collaborations. After this webinar, keep a lookout for some follow-up emails where we will share some of the resources and some of the videos that were linked in the chat. We will also share some of the slides because we know that there's a lot of information and there's also a lot of different languages in the room. And if you have any questions or if you would like to get involved in any way, some of those follow-up emails will also have various contact details. If in doubt, please reach out to me or to the registration email that was connected to this, and we can talk about next steps. Thank you all for joining today from wherever you are in the world, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Hope to see you all soon. Ciao, ciao.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks all to the speakers and the tech team and the translators. Appreciate all of your time and energy today.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thanks, everybody. Goodbye. Good night. Ciao. Gracias. Obrigada.
Your Portuguese is getting good, Kezia. Thank you all.
Who's Gecko?
Yeah, I was just about to say.
That's here.
You're in Southeast Asia, Alessandro, aren't you? I know that.
Yeah, exactly. It's very good.
Super cute. Iconic.
Yeah.
Folks, I wasn't sure if we were supposed to stay on to debrief, or are we piecing out?